Good afternoon. My name is John Lohman. I am the publisher of the Corridor Business Journal. On behalf of my wife, Aspen, and our entire staff, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2020 Corridor Business Journal's Mid-Year Economic Review event. We started doing a mid-year economic review event about 5 or 6 years ago because we realized that so much in the economy changes in a short time. As most of you know, we have a economic forecast luncheon in January, which will get 650 people in attendance. And as we all know, our world has changed in just a short few months. And so we're very fortunate to have a great slate of panelists and a great speaker with us today to share their insights and where they see the economy headed and any challenges or opportunities that they are seeing. As many of you know, this event was originally scheduled to be held in person. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we are doing things a little bit differently today. We are recording live from the Coralville Marriott. Instead of addressing 400 business and community leaders, there are less than 50 people in this ballroom. However, we are excited to share the speakers' insights with a much larger audience online. We are taking all of the necessary precautions to keep our speakers, staff, and live attendees safe. As you can maybe see next to me, the speakers' chairs, the panelists' chairs are all 6 feet apart. Everyone has their own microphone, and all microphones are disinfected earlier today. What you can't see is that everybody in the audience, their chairs are also 6 feet apart, and we have encouraged everybody in the room to wear a mask. We have 2 speakers who could not be here in person. We have our keynote speaker, Charlie Evans, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, who will be presenting remotely. And one of our panelists, Bruce Harreld, the president of the University of Iowa, is also speaking remotely as well. As you can imagine, it takes quite a bit of technical expertise to coordinate all of this. We're very fortunate to have Joe Coffey of Coffee Grande Studios here today to ensure a high-quality audio-visual experience. Like many small businesses, the Corridor Business Journal's business model has been greatly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. If you find value in this webinar and would like to support the Corridor Business Journal, really the best way is to subscribe to the weekly print or digital version of the Corridor Business Journal. If you're joining us online, after you leave the webinar today, you will be redirected to our website where there is an option to make a one-time financial contribution. As you probably know, we would typically charge money to attend this event, but have provided it for free as some businesses and individuals are experiencing severe economic hardship. If you can make a contribution today, that would be very helpful, and thank you for considering that. Okay, so the agenda for today is as follows. I'm going to just say a few more words, and then we're fortunate to have Todd Wishman of Bankers Trust, who will introduce our keynote speaker, Charlie Evans. After Charlie finishes, Jack Evans will facilitate some questions for Charlie, and then we will dive right into the panel discussion. Jack will invite our panelists to come up on stage, and we'll dig into the panel discussion. And again, we'll do our best to conclude the luncheon by 1:15 today. You might be thinking about some specific questions that you have for Charlie Evans or our panelists. For our online viewers, you can type your questions in the Q&A section located at the bottom of your screen. And if you're joining us in person, you can text your questions to 319-936-6555. At this time, I would like to thank our sponsors. Without their support and input, we would not be able to host events like this one. The Mid-Year Economic Review is presented by Bankers Trust. Bankers Trust is a full-service community bank serving the corridor with local decision-making and a full range of commercial and consumer banking, private banking, and wealth management services. As Iowa's largest community bank, Bankers Trust has the expertise and resources you can rely on to achieve your personal or business goals. Experience the Bankers Trust difference. Please help me give Bankers Trust a round of applause. We're also fortunate to have a few other sponsors that I'd like to recognize. We have CLA, MidAmerican Energy, UFG Insurance, Strategic Financial Solutions. CLA exists to create opportunities for their clients, their people, and their communities through their industry-focused advisory, outsourcing, audit, tax, and consulting services. MidAmerican Energy proudly serves 791,000 electric customers and 771,000 natural gas customers in Iowa, Illinois, Nebraska, and South Dakota. And Strategic Financial Solutions is proud to be celebrating their 30th anniversary. For 30 years, Strategic Financial Solutions has been helping individuals and business throughout the corridor plan, implement, and follow through on their retirement plans. They guide clients through financial planning, wealth management, retirement plans, and executive compensation strategies. And last but certainly not least, UFG Insurance. UFG Insurance is a publicly traded, multi-billion-dollar company with more than 70 years of knowledge and experience providing commercial, personal insurance for individuals, families, homes, and businesses. UFG sells through more than 1,000 independent agencies in 46 states, plus the District of Columbia. Please help me give all those sponsors a quick round of applause. Okay, just one more quick reminder about questions. If you have questions for either our speaker or our panelist, if you're online, you can type those questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And if you're in person and you would like to have questions, you can text those to 319-936-6555. We're very fortunate to have Jack Evans moderate our panel again. Jack has moderated most of our economic forecast events over the last 15 years. Jack, of course, is the chairman of the Hall-Perrine Foundation, a Cedar Rapids-based private philanthropic corporation. Prior to assuming this role in 2018, Jack served as president of the organization for 23 years. And over that time, the foundation distributed more than $115 million in grants to numerous local nonprofit organizations. Please help me give Jack a quick round of applause. Okay, now it's my pleasure to welcome Todd Wishman up to the podium to introduce our keynote speaker. Todd is the Eastern Iowa Market President for Bankers Trust, where he is responsible for managing and growing the bank's commercial business in Cedar Rapids and Eastern Iowa. He has more than 25 years of commercial banking experience. Besides running Bankers Trust, Todd serves on the board for Junior Achievement of Eastern Iowa, is a member of the Economic Alliance Large Investor Council, and is active in the Cedar Rapids Downtown Rotary, his church, and his children's various activities. Please help me welcome Todd Wishman up to the podium.
Thank you, John, and thanks again to everyone at the Corridor Business Journal, not only for continuing to plan and host this event, but for adapting its format this year in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's give John and his staff at the Corridor Business Journal a round of applause. Well, I'm sure many of us would enjoy the opportunity to connect in a large group. One advantage I see of this virtual event is broadening our reach. I know several of my Bankers Trust colleagues are joining us virtually today, both here and in Central Iowa. When I offered my welcome remarks at the CBJ's Economic Forecast event in January, I referred to a few key themes I had observed in the CBJ's Vision 2020 edition. Things like the value of strong relationships and the continued reliance and impact of technology on our businesses and lives. And conversely, the cybersecurity risks that come along with technology. Finally, I noted the strong, ongoing commitment our business community has made to local nonprofits and other community partners that help make this area a great place to live, work, and build a life. While much has changed since January, I believe our business leaders' vision for 2020 were actually spot on. I know it's true at Bankers Trust, where we have become even more focused on building long-term relationships and serving our customers through a challenging time. Our own investment in technology infrastructure showed its worth when 400 of our employees across 4 states began working remotely. Many still are. We've created convenient tools that allow us to conduct business virtually. These tools and technology enabled Bankers Trust to help save or secure more than 20,000 jobs through the Paycheck Protection Program. And as today proves, we've all become adept at using video conferencing to stay connected. At the same time, our industry and many others have seen a sharp increase in efforts by cyber criminals and others to take advantage of people's fears and uncertainties. Cybersecurity will remain a top area of focus and concern going forward. Bankers Trust, like many others, has remained committed to giving back to the community throughout the pandemic, a time during which many of our nonprofit partners are struggling. I'm proud to be part of an organization and a community that focuses on these important things, especially during these times of challenge. I'm also eager to hear today from our keynote speaker, and it's my honor to introduce him. Charles Evans is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. In that capacity, he serves on the Federal Open Market Committee, the Federal Reserve System's monetary policy-making body. Before becoming president in September of 2007, Mr. Evans served as Director of Research and Senior Vice President, supervising the bank's research on monetary, policy, banking, financial markets, and regional economic conditions. His personal research has focused on measuring the efforts of monetary policy on U.S. economic activity, inflation, and financial market prices, and has been published in peer-reviewed journals. I'm sure you will agree that we are especially fortunate to have someone with Charles's expertise and experience at the Fed as our keynote speaker today. Please help me welcome Charles Evans.
All right. Okay, well, thank you. Thanks very much, Todd. I really appreciate those nice comments and the introduction. And thanks, John, very much for all those comments about Iowa and the business community. I am glad to be back speaking to this group, and I wish I could say that I was there at the Coralville Marriott. I've been there before. And as it turns out that my son worked there just a few years ago, helping to set up events just like this. The fact that you're able to have this event today makes me hopeful for the day when he's going to be called back to do that. He's now in the Washington, D.C. area. So glad to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. And I just want to say that the views I'm going to express are my own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Federal Open Market Committee or others in the Federal Reserve System. Now, before I begin my remarks, I want to take a moment to reflect on the police incident in Minneapolis that led to the death of George Floyd and the protests that have spread across the country. Like you, I am outraged and horrified by the injustices towards the Black community. In America, racism is structural and pervasive. Racism should have no place in our society, and each of us has a responsibility to combat it. At the Chicago Fed, we have made diversity and inclusion a priority in our own corporate culture. It is a responsibility we all share. We are also together in grappling with the worst pandemic in more than 100 years. Almost overnight, the healthcare crisis has developed into the sharpest economic downturn we've ever experienced. My hope is that states can safely reopen their economies and that in due course, life will return to its previous course. But the path ahead does remain uncertain. In my remarks today, I will focus on three central messages. First, while I hope for a quick rebound in the economy, I expect the broad recovery will take some time. Furthermore, the future is more uncertain now than at any other time in my professional career. The outlook depends on so many factors of a virtually unprecedented nature. We really are in uncharted territory. Second, the situation demands strong fiscal and monetary policy actions to help support households and businesses through these challenging times. Policy has already done a lot, but more may be necessary. For its part, the Federal Reserve is committed to its full range of tools to support the U.S. economy through these difficult times. Third, the economic impact has been catastrophic for an extraordinarily large number of people and businesses. Sadly, the cost has fallen most heavily on some of our most vulnerable populations. No one could have adequately prepared for an event of this magnitude, but low-wage workers in exposed industries have felt disproportionate pain. Now, the broad recovery will take time and the outlook is highly uncertain. Given the rapid onset and unprecedented scale of the current crisis, it is easy to forget the economy was doing well before the pandemic. Labor markets were strong, and at just 3.5%, the unemployment rate was at a 50-year low. The improvements in labor markets were finally benefiting a broad group of workers. Consumer sentiment was high, and importantly, household spending was solid. I don't need to spend time reviewing the specifics of the virus's threat or the actions taken to stem its spread. We all know and have experienced the heavy human and economic toll the healthcare threat has taken. Alarmingly, since February, employers have shed nearly 20 million jobs from their payrolls, and the unemployment rate reached an extraordinarily high 13.3% in May. The most severe job losses have been sustained by those with lower earnings. The socioeconomic groups that are disproportionately affected occupy low-wage jobs in industries deeply impacted by the pandemic, such as leisure and hospitality and retail. As states ease restrictions, economic activity is picking up. And there's some indications that it may be rising faster than most forecasters had anticipated. Consumer spending, which is an important driver of economic activity, showed signs of recovery in May, with retail sales rising sharply for all major categories. As factories began to reopen, manufacturing production, which has been anemic, also picked up last month, although the increase was relatively modest. At this point, it is too early to tell how much of May's improvement is simply timing. Some firms brought back workers sooner than expected. And also, consumers appear to have felt more comfortable returning to stores sooner than most analysts had expected. But some of this likely represents stronger underlying demand than we previously thought. May's improvement probably encompasses a little bit of all of these factors. So for the third quarter, most forecasters are now looking for a positive growth rate in the third quarter that should be quite substantial. Turning to inflation, the Fed's explicit goal is for annual inflation to be symmetric and about 2%. Even with the long recovery and expansion before the pandemic, we never reached this target. And now with the pandemic's impact on aggregate demand, inflation has moved down significantly. So what should we expect for growth and inflation over the next couple of years? As part of our normal policy discussions, the Federal Open Market Committee participants periodically provide forecasts for key economic variables and also appropriate policy views that support these forecasts. These forecasts are released in our quarterly summary of economic projections. The most recent one was released 2 weeks ago after our June meeting. FOMC participants generally expect the economic recovery to begin in the second half of this year. Even so, GDP is expected to show a sharp decline for the year as a whole, with the median forecast for a fall of 6.5%. The median outlook then has GDP rising by 5% next year, and then 3.5% in 2022. The unemployment rate is expected to be somewhat above 9% at the end of this year, and to decline to 5.5% by the end of 2022. That is nearly 1.5 percentage points above the median participants' estimate of its long-run normal level. So it's going to take some time to get back to the much, much better labor market situation that we enjoyed at the end of 2019. And I would note that the range of growth and unemployment rate forecasts made by the FOMC participants were quite wide, attesting to the unprecedented level of uncertainty we face. My own forecast is in broad alignment with the FOMC median. I can't speak to others' assumptions, but crucially, my forecast assumes growth is held back by the response to intermittent localized outbreaks, which might be made worse by the faster than expected reopenings. In this environment, many resources will need to be devoted to health and safety. If health solutions become widely available by 2022, businesses and consumer activity can return to more normal operations by late 2022. My forecast has real GDP returning to its pre-pandemic 2019 fourth quarter level sometime later in 2022. Of course, without the virus, the economy would have been growing. So even after 3 years, my projected recovery does not regain the level of economic activity expected had the virus not occurred. Unfortunately, I think some previously expected trend growth has been permanently lost. Now, regarding inflation, I think some of the extreme price declines in March and April are likely behind us. But the effects of soft aggregate demand could take time to recede and show through to stickier prices. In the June Summary of Economic Projections, the median forecast had core PCE inflation for 2020 at just 1%, 1.0%. Looking ahead, I anticipate the downward pressure on prices from resource slack to diminish in 2021 and 22. If inflation expectations do not fall, this should support some modest increase in inflation in those years. The median FOMC participants forecast has core PCE inflation rising, but to only 1.7% by the end of 2022. Risks to the growth outlook include fragility in inflation expectations, the fiscal situation, and a number of other factors imparting a great deal of uncertainty to this forecast. On balance, even with substantial monetary policy effort, I also see the risk to the inflation outlook is tilted to the downside. Well, these are my best assessments of what's in store, but the uncertainties are enormous. Indeed, other forecasts with more severe effects on economic activity are almost equally as plausible as my view. So let me touch on policy actions that have been taken. Both monetary and fiscal policymakers responded aggressively when the crisis hit. Together, our policies have worked to support households and businesses through the shutdown phase to set the stage for as strong a recovery as possible. Households and businesses will experience losses, but the goal is to limit them as much as we can and to avoid the costly destruction of worker, employer, and business-to-business relationships that have been established over a long period of time and that continue to be productive if they can be reestablished. An important objective here is to keep temporary liquidity difficulties from evolving into more damaging solvency problems. Avoiding unnecessary bankruptcies will help preserve these relationships and help support the return of furloughed workers to their jobs. On the fiscal policy front, Congress responded with the fastest and largest support in any post-war economic downturn. The policies have many elements and include direct aid to households in the form of stimulus checks and expanded unemployment insurance. Loans or grants to small businesses, in particular from the Paycheck Protection Program, with incentives for firms to maintain payrolls, and a host of other efforts providing aid to businesses, healthcare providers, and state and local governments. The Congressional Budget Office puts the price tag of these efforts at almost $2.2 trillion, or about 11% of GDP this fiscal year. And of course, this is enormous. And there's evidence that these have been effective. In research at the Chicago Fed, Karger and Rajan estimate that a recipient's spending increased sharply in the 2 days following the receipt of the stimulus payment before slowly returning to baseline levels after 2 weeks. The initial batch of payments was issued in mid-April, and the timing roughly coincides with the improvement we saw in some of those economic indicators. With regard to monetary policy, the FOMC acted quickly in March and cut the target range for the federal funds rate to 0 to 1/4 percentage point. That's what we refer to as the effective lower bound. The committee also indicated rates would remain low until it is confident that the economy has weathered recent events and is on track to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Given the forecasts I just discussed, this is likely to be the situation for a long time. Indeed, in the June projections, all FOMC participants anticipated that it would be appropriate to maintain the federal funds rate target at its current range through the end of next year, and only 2 out of 17 penciled in a rate increase for the year 2022. In addition to easing the stance of monetary policy, the Fed has deployed various other tools to promote the smooth functioning of financial markets and support the flow of credit to households and businesses. Some of these tools were used successfully during the earlier Great Recession, and others are new. Some programs have been designed to more directly support the flow of credit in the economy, for households, for businesses of all sizes, and for state and local governments. These include the Money Market Mutual Fund Liquidity Facility, the Paycheck Protection Program Lending Facility, the Municipal Liquidity Facility, and the Main Street Lending Programs, among others. Some of these programs provide backstops to key financial markets, which can increase the willingness of private lenders to extend credit. Others deliver more direct participation in loans to small and medium businesses, nonprofits, and state and local governments. Many of these programs rely on emergency lending powers that require the approval of the Treasury and are available only in very unusual circumstances, such as those we find ourselves in today. We are deploying these lending powers to an unprecedented extent with financial backing and support from Congress, the President, and from the Treasury. Despite all these efforts, more may be needed. Further fiscal policy actions are under consideration. On the Fed's part, as Chair Jay Powell has emphasized repeatedly, we will continue to use our lending powers forcefully, proactively, and aggressively until we are confident that we are solidly on the road to recovery. And even after the recovery is well in train, we will use all of our tools to meet our dual mandate goals of maximum employment and symmetric 2% inflation. Now, as I noted earlier, before the pandemic hit, even those who were sometimes last to experience the benefits of a rising tide were beginning to share in economic prosperity. For example, after hitting double digits in the Great Recession, unemployment rates for Black and Latinx workers had fallen to historic lows of 5.9 and 4.2%, respectively, by the end of 2019. Wage growth also had started to pick up for low-skill minority workers, but the situation has deteriorated. Those Black and Latinx unemployment rates are now 16.8 and 17.6%. This recession is unique in its rapid onset, scope, and scale. And unfortunately, the burden falls most heavily on many who are least able to bear it. As I mentioned earlier, the impact on workers in the retail, leisure, and hospitality and other service sectors is especially severe. These industries tend to employ disproportionately more females, minorities, and younger workers. Enormous job losses in these sectors have pushed already high unemployment rates even higher for these groups. In addition, many of these workers have dropped out of the labor force since the start of the pandemic. Also, stay-at-home orders and consumer anxieties regarding safety have led to record high rates of business closures. These are hard on everyone, but become serious if a temporary closure turns into an outright business failure. Although closures cut across nearly all industries, minority-owned businesses and those owned by women and immigrants are disproportionately at risk of failing. This is because of the industries in which they operate and because these enterprises have fewer resources to survive the downturn. Should these businesses permanently shutter their doors, their failures could have longer-term implications for their owners, their employees, and the communities in which they operate. Frontline workers in essential industries have been working to meet our needs, and in this process, they risk their own health and the health of those in their households. This is a heavy burden to bear, and they bear it for all of us. Many of these workers are less educated and earn below average wages, and many are minorities, and they are unlikely to receive hazard pay for this exposure to greater health risk. After the Great Recession, it took many years for the economic recovery to translate into employment and wage gains for disadvantaged workers. Even then, there were concerns that these gains were not sufficiently widespread or that they would not persist. Distressingly, the grim situation we currently face risks jeopardizing those gains. The longer the current recession lasts, or the weaker the recovery is, the greater the risk of lasting damage for female, minority, younger, and less skilled workers. Prolonged periods of unemployment may downgrade their human capital and can have lasting effects on productivity and income. Another concern is that minority, female-headed, disadvantaged, and younger households have fewer savings to tap in an emergency and may face a greater risk of bankruptcy. Even after the worst of the crisis is past, the scarring of their balance sheets may leave them further behind. Nonprofits and state and local governments are at the front line of providing services to many severely impacted households. They provide food, healthcare, virus testing, unemployment insurance, and other assistance. The ballooning need for these services and the additional cost of social unrest come at a time when tax revenues and funding for some nonprofits are falling. The budgetary stress on these institutions could have serious consequences for their ability to provide crucial services in the future. The various fiscal and monetary policy programs I discussed earlier are designed to offer an unprecedented degree of support to households and businesses so as to mitigate the damage. Even so, given the enormous challenges that lie ahead, more may be needed. So let me just say in conclusion that state and local governments are in the first stages of reopening their economies. It's too early to know how quickly the economy will return to normal or what the longer term impact of the pandemic will be. We're going to learn a lot over the coming months. The Fed's actions touch communities, families, and businesses across the country. Whatever is in store, we are committed to using our full range of tools until we're confident that the economy has weathered recent events, is on track to achieve our maximum employment and price stability goals. Thanks very much for your attention. I look forward to your questions. I got to put the earthing back in.
Thank you very much, Charlie. What you all should know is Charlie is the dean of the Federal Reserve Bank system of the 12 regional banks. He's the longest serving member. So as you saw, he really does know his business. Charlie, we have a couple questions here. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, Jack. That's great.
First of all, do you or the Federal Reserve System anticipate negative interest rates?
Oh, I've been getting that question
a
good bit lately. You know, we're at zero, and a number of foreign central banks have implemented negative interest rates over the last many years in order to support their economies and increase inflation. I would say at the moment, the Federal Reserve is looking at all of our tools. We have provided a lot of liquidity in many forms. We've done asset purchases, most to improve market functioning so far. I think we're going to get to a point before too long where we have to look at our inflation objectives and how the economy is going and make a judgment as to whether additional monetary policy support will be needed. We'll look at the fiscal support that's been provided and make a judgment. But I will say in terms of negative interest rates, I would be surprised if we went down that road. I don't think anybody's really thinking about that at the moment. But it's a question that keeps coming up.
Thank you. Earlier this week, there was the PMI in Europe and Asia was released, and it was up substantially over what was estimated. Do you think this will carry over to the United States?
Well, I think the May data in the labor market and retail sales have already shown that that the economy seems to be opening up again, that we're experiencing a rebound. And so, yes, I do expect that we're going to see stronger growth in the second half. You know, we've seen such sharp declines in the second quarter, we'd almost have to see improvement. And so people going back to work, businesses reopening. I think manufacturing, you know, many firms in the manufacturing sector have figured out how to produce safely. They've got capacity, production back up, not far from capacity, or they're doing it. It's more expensive, but they're able to do that. So in the US, I'm looking forward to strong growth in the second half and next year. But having said that, you know, we fell a lot in the second quarter, and it's going to take a while before we get back up to the previous level. A lot of that's going to depend on how the spread of the virus proceeds, how it's contained, people's behavior, and whether or not there are therapeutics and a vaccine.
Charlie, as a scholar, is there any similar economic situation in history that we are experiencing today?
You know, I suppose the closest is the 1918 so-called Spanish flu that killed so many Americans. It actually, according to economic historians of the time who talk about, you know, that time period after World War I and before the Great Depression, they don't really talk about the impact of, that disease, those shutdowns, those deaths on the economy. So it doesn't really provide a tremendous amount of guidance. It's not like the Great Depression, which was a financial crisis and many other factors. It's not like the Great Recession of 2008 and beyond, when it was a financial crisis. It's really unusual. It's a real shock. It's a public health shock that we're trying to figure out how to respond to and how we can operate safely, reopen businesses, make consumers confident that they can go out into retail institutions, restaurants, enjoy leisure. And that's just a very different challenge. And, the first real step on the way back is making people feel comfortable with the state of public health.
Good. This is more of a regional question, Charlie. To what extent do you think the recovery in the state of Iowa will differ from that of the rest of the nation?
I think everybody's going to be challenged somewhat equally. I mean, I think the health consequences are likely to be affecting everyone. Now, to the extent that there's less urban density, obviously, I think cities are more challenged. High rises, going back into office complexes and things like that is very difficult. And, to the extent that you might have more economic activity in other areas, you might get away with slightly better experiences. But, manufacturing companies, food production, agriculture, and, then we have all of the issues that were still hanging around back in 2019, which is the state of trade negotiations. What's the president going to be trying to negotiate? I saw some report today of, attention on other countries beyond just China. And so I think it's hard to know, but it's possible that Iowa is better positioned than your average state in the union.
Great. What areas of the economy have the best opportunity to grow over the next couple of years?
Well, I think manufacturing has been able to deal with the public health consequences on the factory floor. I think we've learned that, a lot of activity, in a lot of firms, there's a large part of their workforce that can work from home. They can continue to meet their business needs. In the Federal Reserve, we have this work from home posture for employees that are not essential for cash operations and law enforcement and some other activities in our banks. And we've been able to use technology to respond to our needs. Got bank supervisors who are preparing for bank exams and monitoring the economy, economists who are looking at the economy. Our financial services people are able to respond to the circumstances and continue to develop new products and technology. So we continue to work away, and I think a large part of the U.S. economy can do that. Now, I think a real question is how long that's sustainable. When young people want to move downtown, they might have a small apartment. They can work in their apartment for a while, but after a while, it gets very difficult. So I think going back to the office is going to be very important. But I think the leisure and hospitality vacation sector is going to be challenged until there's a vaccine or people are very confident traveling, and airlines and related activities.
Charlie, several people have asked if you expect any additional fiscal stimulus from Congress.
Well, I think there's a role for that. I think that the state and local governments are going to be remarkably challenged. I think that tax revenues are way down during the period when people didn't go out and about and buy things. We had a shutdown. Sales tax revenues were low. There was online, purchases and things like that. But I think state and local governments are challenged. They employ a lot of people, and they have to run balanced budgets. And these are events that challenge even the most fiscally responsible governments because it hit everybody. It's not some type of event anybody could insure against because nobody would be offering insurance for this. And so I think there is a role for the federal government to provide relief assistance of some magnitude. And I would be hopeful that that could be thought through very carefully because there's an awful lot of employment in the state and local government, and then the associated impact from the things that those employees buy or don't buy if they're laid off.
Thank you very much, Charlie. We appreciate you taking the time today. And if you have some time, we hope you'd stick around and listen to what the panel has to say.
Okay, great. Thanks. Looking forward to it.
And Joe, can we get Bruce in? I'll start introducing the panel while we're waiting for Bruce to join us.
I'm here.
On your right is the CEO and president of the Amana Society, Greg Luerkens. Sitting next to Greg is Lura McBride. Lura is the president and chief executive officer of Van Meter. And on your left is Kathryn Kunert, who is vice president of economic communications and integration for MidAmerican Energy. And that handsome lad on the screen, I think everyone here knows, is Bruce Harreld, president of the University of Iowa. We'll start with some questions. And Greg, let's start with you. Could you give the audience a brief summary of the Society's businesses?
It's important to understand where we come from, or the origins of our organization. We started as a communal society back in 1855. Individuals from Germany came in and settled the roughly 26,000 acres that we have out in Amana. In 1932, that communal society was dissolved and the Amana Society was formed. Under our umbrella today, we have 11 different businesses, as I count them, soon to be 12. We have quite a footprint from the agricultural side. So we plant, or have planted this year, about 7,700 acres of corn and soybeans. We have about 2,000 head of cattle. We have multiple manufacturing businesses with our furniture shop and our woolen mill, retail businesses. So again, the furniture, woolen mill, the general store, our meat shop. And in addition to that, the Amanas in general is very key on tourism, and our businesses all help to support that within the community.
Thanks. Lura, a similar question, a brief overview of Van Meter.
Sure, thanks, Jack, and good afternoon, everybody. Van Meter Inc. is America's 26th largest electrical distributor. We serve all 50 states and do some business internationally as well. We have been working for over 96 years, founded down by Green Square Park in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, serving really the industrial and the OEM side of manufacturing, as well as the electrical contractors in the construction space. We are 100% employee owned. We've got just about 500 employee owners working in 4 states across our nation. Most of our employee owners are working around the state of Iowa. We've got some down in Kansas City, Kansas, Omaha, Nebraska, and Richmond, Virginia.
Thanks. Kathryn, I think everyone in the room is familiar with MidAmerican Energy. Could you summarize what your economic forecast is for the balance of this year and into 2021?
Well, Jack, that's interesting, particularly with the situation that we're seeing, obviously, that we never really expected with the COVID-19 situation. But I think, with the way that Iowa, in particular, if we're focused on that state, with the way that we're set up with manufacturing and we have a huge emphasis in the food space, I think that helps us as being one of our targeted clusters. I think there's a lot of opportunity here for us to grow and reassess of what we have available to us. We have a lot of strengths here, obviously, in our state. Some of them that we always knew about, I think, have been heightened and stood up more. The fact of how we live, the fact that we, have the various ability to live and work outside is huge to us. I think our varied economies make a lot of sense. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here for our state to really continue to expand and grow the economy that we've built on and have the ability to bring it back, I think, even stronger with some of the strengths, whether we talk about reshoring or onshoring with our supply chain issues that we've had. I think we've got a lot of opportunity here in our state.
Good, thank you. Bruce, welcome. I think everyone in this room understands the difficulty of the job that you have. So I'd like to ask you I'll start with the first one, but to try to get your reaction. And first of all, your reaction to COVID-19 and how it affects students and faculty.
Wow, and by the way, thank you, Jack, and thank you. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. You look great in that beard.
Thanks.
I haven't seen you. I've talked to you on the phone, but it's a very distinguished look. I think the simplest way to answer that question is it impacted everything. It's impacted, obviously we had to very quickly shut down almost our entire campus. We kept our some dorm capacity for students from international environments that needed a place to stay, but that was about 100 students in total. And so we shuttered everything. We hibernated our research. The only place that really stayed open was our hospital system. We can talk more about that later, but they did an incredible job of dropping dramatically the number of surgeries and the number of clinic visits so we could protect our healthcare workers as well as preserve personal protective equipment. It obviously shut down athletics. We were right in the midst of a game in the Big Ten championship for basketball, and it shut down. So we sent students home. We had to bring students back and faculty back internationally. So it's impacted everything. I will say we're also learning that the reopening is a lot more complex than shutting down. There are a lot of details about how we reopen, and we can talk about that more in a moment as well. But it's shutting things down is pretty simple. Reopening, I think most of us, even the businesses, are finding the same thing. It's a lot more complex, particularly in the midst of this virus, which is still in our communities. I'll just give a little bit of data here. We're down to only a few patients, 8 in fact, last night in our hospital who are being treated for CV-19. Having said that, we were, I'd say 5 or 6 days ago, we were looking at 2 positives per day in our system. 2 patients a day showing up positive. We've now spiked to 33. So we're beginning to see, as this economy reopens, that in fact it's exposing a lot more of us to the virus. Fortunately, I guess fortunately, most of those 33 are younger generation, and they don't seem to be as impacted as negatively as some of us, Jack, your age and mine. So that's a quick overview. It impacted everything. And it's been an incredible journey.
Thank you. Greg, could you talk a little bit about what you see for agriculture, the balance of this year and going into next?
Yeah, as far as the agricultural side of the market, it's really going to be quite interesting. From the crop side, it's been a pretty good year in terms of being able to get out in the fields and get things planted. Sounds like, the forecast for corn, as an example, is very good. Looking into what we're expecting year end, we have a little different situation sometimes out in Amana. We're waiting for our next round of flooding after the heavy rains that we've gotten. But for the most part, the crop throughout the country looks good. That, however, creates an additional challenge, particularly on the side of corn. About half of the corn that's produced in the United States is used in ethanol production. And with a lot of the ethanol facilities being shut down, that has put some downward pressure on the commodity itself. So that will be very much a challenge going forward. On the livestock side of the market, that remains a challenge with a limited number of packing facilities. It's a real challenge for the growers or the companies that raise cattle and hogs. The downward pressure on it has been pretty extreme. In many cases, the the growers are losing money, or the packing facilities are making a lot of money. And there could potentially be some legislation and some things coming down, but the ag market in general is very interesting because of the commodity pricing.
Thanks. Lura, in your industry, what outlook do you have?
Well, we've got to keep an optimistic outlook, right? I'll just say I think it's evolving and it's changing day by day. What we thought the economic outlook was maybe in March is I think all of our businesses were preparing for the 3 different maybe economic models, right? The V, the U, and the L. The most recent one we've really been sort of zoning in on is the one that they call the Nike swoosh. And for us, got the year off to a great start. May probably has been our toughest month so far. We'll see how June turns out. Year over year, we're about 6% off of our top line plan. Expect though that this is going to be a little bit longer recovery, and frankly in Charlie's remarks when he talked about that kind of 2022 and maybe even to 2023, our anticipation is that the overall electrical market will be down 20%. The overall electrical spend in that sector will be down 20% this year over last year. It's looking to remain somewhat flattish to slightly down next year, with a nice rebound in 2022. So we're going to continue to stay optimistic. We're going to continue to stay very close to our customers, evolving what we do for them in unique ways and close to our team. And we will just continue to make the adjustments like all of you are doing in your businesses along the way, and help keep the confidence high.
Kathryn, MidAmerican supplied over 60% of its electricity last year from renewables. I think that was up like 18% from 2018. Could you give the audience just a little color on how that works and what you expect for 2021?
Yeah, absolutely. So MidAmerican's obviously very proud of the renewable story that we're able to provide for our customers. So we started, to give you a little bit of quick history, we started back in the early 2000s with some legislation that allowed for investor-owned utilities to both own and operate their generation and the wind generation. And so that allowed for the economics of then to come into play and really helped us make the move that we did, then along with some other federal legislation with the production tax credit. So we knew that obviously investing in renewables was the right thing to do, right? One of our 6 core principles is environmental respect. We know that sustainability is a huge piece of who we are, who you are. It's our customers, it's our communities. So we started investing in wind, and then we really decided that we want to be a leader, because that's who we are, right? That's where we like to be in Iowa. And in MidAmerican, listening to our customers and getting ready for the future. We never wait for the future. We're always trying to help out there making it happen. And so back in 2016, when we announced our Wind 12 project, we were able to announce, and we were the first in the country with the investor-owned to say that we're going to be 100% renewable. And we actually have a plan behind that. And so Wind 12 actually helped us put that plan together of investing in wind. And we now in the next year or so, we're going to have 34 different wind locations in the state of Iowa to help serve and provide our customers that renewable energy. So with that, then we came up with the Green Advantage program, and it's actually a program along with our regulators at the Iowa Utilities Board. They verify how much we produced the year prior for our customers from renewable energy for their actual annual usage. And so this year, and the number that Jack provided is 61.3%. So it doesn't matter if you're at Kirkwood or if you're at True North or you're a coffee shop or you're in Van Meter. If you're using it in your home, you can say whatever product you're making or using or powering your lights with. If you're in our electric service territory, you can say it was produced with 61.3%, right? That's a phenomenal thing. That is an economic competitive advantage. That's what we all are trying to do. So you partner that up with our rates, which are the 12th lowest in the country, which we know drives economic development. It drives growth. It helps with the recovery. If you can afford, one of the basic needs of all businesses and homes is to keep those rates low. You throw in the renewable story, and it really elevates our state and this economy.
Good, thanks. Bruce, you touched on UIHC a minute ago, but could you drill down a little further on actions that were taken in response to COVID-19?
I'd be glad to. On a typical basis a daily basis before CV-19, we had about 800 patients in our hospital every night in beds. Obviously, we're an academic medical center. Most of those patients, we've been full for a long, long time, and most of those patients are really need our help. One of the things we did very early on, we didn't quite know where the virus would go and how quickly it would spread. And some of you remember in Johnson County, we had a little bit of a scare of some cruise ships and a spike real quickly. And all of a sudden we were confronted with a set of patients coming back into our area that really needed help. So what we did is, part of the strategy was to send all of our students home, just in case we needed the residence hall capacity. Additionally, we stopped all elective procedures, and I should define elective procedures are anything that's scheduled. So if it's scheduled and can be rescheduled, it's elective. And so we dramatically cut back to almost zero in terms of elective procedures. We also closed a number of our clinics. So we went from about 800 patients in bed to roughly 500. And we did that just in case. We also created separate pathways. So when patients came to the hospital, even to the ER, they didn't walk right into the ER. We had to assume that anybody that presented themselves at the hospital might be carrying the virus. And so we created separate pathways. We could isolate people. We could test everybody coming into the hospital. And we also had to test, obviously, on a daily basis, all of our physicians and healthcare workers. That worked phenomenally. We have not had any significant spread at all among our healthcare workers. We've had one incident, but actually when we started tracing back where it originated, it was actually at a social party for some of the healthcare workers at a private home, not in the hospital. So we've been pretty successful in terms of keeping people safe and learning how to treat people. Very early on, we were part of the early pilots were FDA approved of the plasma transfusion process. It was at Iowa. Secondly, remdesivir, which has now been approved. We were one of the early test sites for that. So I said the quality of care and the learning about the virus has just been phenomenal. So all that's the good news. The bad news is when we went from 800 patients in the hospital to the 500 patients in the hospital on a daily basis, we basically, probably not a very good term, but it's true, we trashed our financials. We have basically gone from, we're at one point losing about $100 million a month if you projected it. And so it was pretty significant. Since then, as the virus is actually not materialized as dramatically as we were fearful of, we had a peak of about 45-ish, shall we say. We went through about 10 days where we had 45 patients a day in the hospital, several of them on ventilators. We're now down, as I said a moment ago, I think I said we're down into the 8. Last night, we've been in the single-digit numbers for the last several days. And the governor allowed us to reopen our elective surgeries a few weeks ago with some very specific safety standards. And we have, and so I think roughly last night, we had 125 empty beds as opposed to 300. So things are starting to come back, but they're coming back. It probably, in some sense, one of the safest places to be is in the hospital because of all the work they've done with separate pathways, the testing, PPE. And so, but it's not coming, it's a little more of the U, to use that expression here. But we've gotten through it and thank goodness. And I really want to thank all the healthcare workers and all the people at State Hygienic Labs, which is part of the university system. They went from 1 shift to 2 shifts to 3 shifts. and now doing thousands of tests on a weekly basis, excuse me. So long journey.
Thank you. Greg, you mentioned 2,000 head of cattle. Could you share with the audience a little bit about what you feed them and what Cedar Rapids produces as a byproduct?
Well, I think what Jack's getting to is one of the operations that we have under the umbrella of our farms is an anaerobic digester. So we have a sizable feed lot. We feed those cattle, and the manure is actually used and converted into electricity. And that electricity is used by our service company to service the electrical needs of the Amana colonies. So we service about 1,400 customers, which is the population out there, with the electricity that's produced in a very sustainable manner. We also have another business, again, under our farms umbrella, that falls under that sustainable type business, where we actually haul a substrate from one of the companies here in the Cedar Rapids area, and we're able to utilize that as a very effective fertilizer on our fields. So in everything that we do, and it's kind of the Amana way, if you will, we are practicing sustainable methods within our farming operation, really all of our operations.
Thanks. Lura, in terms of the virus, could you talk a little bit about the negative consequences to your business? And also, are there any positives?
Well, I think you know I'm a positive person, right? So there are a lot of positives, but I think the negatives are probably very similar to yours. Certainly, it's just been kind of the uncertainty and the instability of what's happening for your workforce. And our real goal has been to focus on our people. And, you know, people will never forget how you made them feel during times like this. So that stabilization of workforce has been a primary focus, but just that negativity and the uncertainty in that certainly has, you know, not been a real driving force during this time. The other thing I would just say from a negative standpoint is there have been some supplier impacts. I'd say they're variable and sporadic. It's not been something that has really impacted the business, but I certainly think we keep our eye on the manufacturing side, the supply side. But from a positive perspective, I think you all know everybody's been focused on what are the silver linings in all of this. And we had made some significant investments in technology in our business. We've made some significant investments in digital and e-commerce in our business. And I think that this is really going to be an opportunity for us to take those investments to the next level. We will have to. So many more people are working from home. So many more people are finding work-life balance. I think we've got those. We think about the outlook of this. We're going to have to figure out how we continue to be flexible as employers, how we reinvent as employers, how we bring our people together to still continue to serve our customers in really new and unique ways as well.
Good. Kathryn, what headwinds do you see for the balance of this year and next year?
Well, I think it's interesting to look at it as, you know, Lura pointed out, you know, there's the silver linings, right? But we have to be realistic that we've still got some challenges in front of us, whether it comes to, you know, our workforce. And, you know, there's many businesses who are probably not going to be able to recover and at the rate that they were expected to be growing and successful, let alone maybe even being able to stand back up, and then are the amount of jobs there. So I think there's some headwinds just in the whole recovery, the time that it takes, that sort of thing. I think we too have to be careful with some of the policies that are put around companies and businesses and communities. I think we have to really watch those to make sure that they're fair and balanced to everybody so that we can move forward. I think we have to really rethink and reimagine, right? One of the things that I say with my team, there's a couple of them sitting here, that if we're doing today what we did yesterday, we're behind for tomorrow. So I think we really have to be creative, and we have to think different. We have to challenge ourselves because our world is different. And if we are looking for that new normal or coming back to that base of where we were, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. We're not creating that competitive advantage that we know that we need to have. So I think we really need to, look almost at that clean slate of paper and say, we've got an opportunity here now, let's capitalize it on it. And what is it going to be? It can be with, different education opportunities, different community opportunities, different business opportunities. So I think we need to really stay focused on that and not get comfortable and then really challenge ourselves for what needs to happen differently.
Good. Bruce, I know you anticipated my question on athletics. Could you comment on that a bit?
Yes, I'd be glad to. I guess the place to begin is before we get to athletics, we need to open our campus. Our athletes are students first and foremost. And so August 24th, we're reopening, which is our normal date. We think we have, after a ton of work, and we're doing a lot of training and rolling this out. I have another big meeting today with our campus community using this same technology to talk about all the procedures we're going to be using across our campus, including wearing of masks, socially distancing our large classes, taking exceedingly large, or all our classes will be socially distancing, but any class over 50 will need to be, a good portion of it need to be online. We're doing testing in our residence halls, and the list goes on and on and on. And that is first and foremost critical for athletics. I made a comment in April that hit the national news about I expected we could well be back to football practice, strength and conditioning training in June 1. And everybody said, you're crazy. Well, we missed it, and they were right. We got back on June 8th to conditioning, and we're now testing our football team on a daily basis. We're socially distancing. It's voluntary. So we're doing a lot of contact tracing. I will just give you one glimpse of what starts to happen, because I think we're prepared for a lot of it. But we have had, as you've seen in the news, some of our athletes test positive for CV-19. When they test positive, we, per CDC and Iowa Department of Public Health guidelines, we then need to contact trace and determine who they've been in contact with, and then we need to isolate those individuals. Well, once you have one positive CV-19 in the football program, which we've had, who do you think football players are hanging out with right now? Football players. And so one positive test turns into 8 to 10 or sometimes even more in isolation. So we're starting this, the math of this is getting very interesting, and it's getting difficult. And I will say there are a lot of discussions going across all of the major Autonomy 5 programs in the United States, trying to think about what do we do with fans in stadiums. It's very clear we can't have them as packed in as they usually are. That's not safe. So I hear people talking about 50% capacity, 25% capacity. I heard one institution the other day say that they would only allow students in to watch a game. And that's all still very much in flux. I think the protocols for how do we know that the team that we play actually has done all the testing and they don't have a lot of positives, so that while the Hawkeyes will win that game, but the next week, most of the players may be on the sideline because they just got the virus. So there's just a lot of fluidity in this. And I would say we're all looking for simple answers to complex problems. And that isn't going to happen. We're going to have to take and I think each sport is different. Football is one thing. Think about some of the fall sports like volleyball that are indoors. And so it's even trickier, because now we have to worry about the HVAC system inside a Carver Hawkeye Arena, and how much air gets recirculated, and is that a good or bad thing? So it is a very, very, very complicated picture. My current best guess, because I know you're going to ask me that, Jack, is that we will get back to something, but it's going to look very different than what it's looked like last year. It could well be a shortened season. It could be a lot more restrictions on testing and who's allowed to play. And these safety guidelines, we've got to find a way that one conference can't have one set of safety guidelines and another conference have another, particularly in the early season games when we play across conferences, and in the bowl games when we definitely play all across the country. So stay tuned.
Good, thank you. Greg, on the hospitality front, what projects are on the horizon?
We have a big one going on in Amana. So for a community of 1,400 people, we currently have a $17.5 million historic restoration project on the campus or the site of our Amana woolen mill. So what we're creating there is a 65-room boutique hotel, will be called Hotel Millwright. It's going to be a very neat place in a lot of ways. So we're going to have an event center, being able to host weddings there. It will have a very nice restaurant, a lounge, and then uniquely there is a very small little sandstone building next to I guess the main entrance of what will be the hotel, and that will be a very intimate little Scotch and whiskey bar. So we're pretty excited about opening the hotel in the fall of this year. However, it's a little bit scary with everything that's going on in the hospitality industry. We feel very good, however, that we have contracted a company that specializes in running boutique hotels to operate it for us. So we currently have a general manager in place. We have an executive chef in place. They're doing some interviews to hire some additional people. But for the Amanas, it's really a big deal. So much of our business in the community is geared around tourism, and this will really give a quality place to stay when hopefully young families come to town and tap into all the experiences that we have out in Amana. So we're an organization that is very, driven by our values. Our values are around community and family, and this hotel project is going to be a very nice addition to just furthering that vision for us.
Good, that's exciting. Lura, in terms of the construction industry, what do you see for the balance of the year and next year in your trade territory?
The construction industry, really, the indicators that we're looking at really are following along with what I shared earlier. The construction market is looking to be down 20%, the electrical spend on the construction side. Next year, it's looking to be flat. I think we're seeing where there's some projects for us that are just put on pause, and there's some workforce things and some precautions. Some of these projects have taken very proactively to pull back workforce, and then we'll start reintroducing workforce. So those will happen and probably come back at a very quick pace. I think we're seeing, though, that the backlog is starting to diminish, and some of those newer starts, the bidding starting to slow, et cetera. Van Meter has worked on its diversification strategy over the years. So really getting into the data center space, that's a space that's not slowing, except for a little bit of workforce stuff here and there. We've got teams that are traveling across the country to work on various very large-scale data center projects. Solar has been a niche for us that's been very successful. And so as we continue to look at finding ways to get more forward thinking on the solar space, we're getting the opportunity to work with more of those install-based contractors as well. So that's been good for us.
Kathryn, what are the workforce plans for MidAmerican in the next couple of years?
We'll be holding steady on our workforce. Right now we have around 3,300 employees. So our intent is obviously to hold very steady. Much like many industries, we have a bulk of our employees that are retiring, right? So we're filling those jobs, and we've been filling those jobs. So we have a lot of newer workers, I would say, in our workforce, a younger workforce, and not necessarily as an age, but with their tenure at the company. We've been reinvesting, obviously, for our employees in our workspaces. So we've done a lot of rebuilding, a lot of remodeling, a lot of new builds for our employees so that they have a great place to work. We know that in order to have good workers, you have to have a great place for them to want to come to work. So between the actual bricks and mortars of the spaces that we provide, I think we've created a great culture for our employees as well. We know that's really, really important for our employees, particularly now that you have multi-generations working next, hand in hand and next door to each other, that we've got to be able to accommodate the needs and the wants, which are just as important when you're working like you do in a utility company that's 24/7, 365. So I think, again, proud of our company that we've been forward thinking to reinvest. And again, it's one of our core principles is to take care of our employees, and that's employee commitment. And so we've got to make sure that we're doing those things, and we're doing that. I have to mention just a little bit what Lura said about investing in data centers and back to sustainability. Obviously, when we talk about sustainability and we think about the things that are important to us and how it all ties together, her business is tied on the success of others being able to do business here. And one of the biggest economic development factors is utilities. So when you got good rates and you got sustainable, renewable power coming their way, which is one of the reasons we have the strong data centers in our service area. We've got them all, right? And so that's a great thing. And then it helps build out the supply chain that's so important. So you can see how that economy works and why it's so critically important that we continue to, interact and partner on a lot of different aspects of the economy.
Good. Bruce, we'll give you the last word. Could you talk a little bit about something that Lura mentioned, and that is, once we get through this, the rehiring of people and what your thoughts are?
Yes, I'd be glad to, Jack. Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful panel. Excellent commentators. My advice, as we went through at the university level, thinking about this crisis, which became a CV-19 viral crisis, then became for us an economic set of issues. And then we started experiencing in our society, even here in the heartland, a lot of social unrest. One of the things we were very conscious of is that if we just quickly furloughed a lot of people or even fired them, that it was going to be quite problematic, because at some point we didn't have a lot of excess capacity in our system. So we're going to need those people back. And I would remind all the people listening to this that before this started, we were pretty much in a full employment economy. And now we've gone to a very high unemployment economy, but we're starting to open up. And I think we should anticipate, all of us should take a serious look at our HR policies and anticipate that the people coming back will be very selective. They will remember how they got treated during the downturn. And they could well use that in thinking about whether they want to go back there. To some extent, the employees may have the upper hand in choosing where they want to work. So my advice to all the businesses in the room and universities and governmental agencies is you better take a look at your HR policies, and you better make sure that they're really competitive, top-notch, and deal with the diversity, equity, and inclusion issues running through our society. If you don't, you could be at the back end of the preferred list for a lot of people who are rejoining. They will not necessarily rejoin, I don't believe, some of the companies and organizations that left them behind a little bit during this crisis. So I'm pretty optimistic that the economy is going to come back. You better have really good, solid employee practices so you can get your pick of that crew that's coming back to work.
Thank you. Let's give our panel a round of applause.
And please help me give Jack a round of applause as well for moderating. I'd like to thank Charlie Evans again for sharing his time and expertise with us today. I'd like to thank our sponsors once more, Bankers Trust, CLA, MidAmerican Energy, Strategic Financial Solutions, and UFG Insurance. If you enjoyed this event, you might want to mark your calendar for the 2021 Economic Forecast Luncheon, which is scheduled for Wednesday, January 20th. And before we leave, I did want to plug a couple upcoming CBJ events. Coming up on August 20th, we will have our Fastest Growing Companies Awards, which identifies and honors the region's most dynamic companies that have made a significant contribution to the strength of the local economy. We announced this year's honorees earlier this week. However, the rankings will not be unveiled until the awards banquet, and we will have a representative from each company at the event to accept their award. But for the safety of the honorees, sponsors, and staff, we are only offering Zoom webinar tickets to the public. You can sign up for that event on our website at corridorbusiness.com. And then coming up on September 1st, we will spotlight 24 of the region's coolest places to work. This event identifies and honors companies that have created the most engaging and rewarding work environments. Honorees must be headquartered in Kirkwood's 7-county corridor region and are selected based on the results of a worker satisfaction survey. Again, you can find out more information on our website at corridorbusiness.com. I want to thank all of you for coming today. Keep reading the weekly Corridor Business Journal, and we are adjourned. Thank you.